we will do this masterclass on two parts. A part will be the journey of John Barnes, the football player. And then the second part will be the destiny, which is the after football, life after football, how it was.
Okay.
So you comfortable with that?
Absolutely.
All right. Okay. Then we shall start. Thank you for joining us today, John. It's an honor to have you with us here in our Jasur Masterclass. We would like to start off our interview by just if you could tell us about your early beginnings and what drove you to football.
Well, I was brought up in Jamaica, and I came to England when I was 13 years old. But as a young boy growing up in Jamaica, I always played football. My father was a colonel in the Jamaican army, and how I ended up in England was he got sent as military attaché to England for 4 years. So the family, we didn't emigrate. It was a 4-year diplomatic posting. But my father also played football for Jamaica. Of course, there's no professional football. And as an army officer, because he had a lot of discipline and he was fairly good at football, he was the captain of the Jamaica football team. He then went on later to manage the Jamaica football team. He was always involved in sports. He became president of the Squash Rackets Association of Jamaica, the Swimming Association of Jamaica. So I was brought up in a sporting household. So from I was 4, 5, 6 years old, I played football. I'm no different to any young boy. Football belongs to the world, not just to Europe and South America. I'm sure there are young boys in Qatar who love football. And because I'm from Jamaica and it's not a footballing hotbed, people are surprised when I tell them that I grew up playing football in Jamaica. So my first memories were of the 1974 World Cup, where I supported West Germany. Because growing up in Jamaica, obviously we didn't get English football on television, so I didn't know much about English football. But my father went to the 1972 Munich Olympics, and he brought me back my first pair of football boots. Obviously, Munich is in Germany, and of course, my first football boots were Adidas Gerd Müller, who was the centre forward for West Germany and Bayern Munich. So I grew up loving West German football and Bayern Munich and Gerd Müller and Franz Beckenbauer. But I grew up playing football. All my friends played football. I'm sure you heard of the sport cricket, and West Indies in the 80s and 70s were the best cricketing team. But I played cricket at school, of course, but it was always going to be football. So when I came to England as a 13-year-old, the fact that I knew I was going to be in the home of football, if that's what you want to call England, it was a really exciting time. I didn't expect to stay for 40 years because I knew when I was 17, I would go back to Jamaica. And I got offered a scholarship to Washington University. A lot of Jamaicans go to university in America. I got offered a football scholarship. So I would have gone to Washington University, did a degree in I don't know what, and I wouldn't have played professional football. But I would have played football. Because don't forget, of course, now in Qatar you have professional football, but say 30, 40 years ago, they always had football, even if there's no professional football. So I would have played in Jamaica, not professionally, but I would have played like my father, had a job. So the love of football is what really drove me on, not the dream of being a professional footballer. A consequence of my love of football was I became a professional footballer. But had I not been a professional footballer, I still would have loved football, would have played football. Of course, I would have had to have a job. So a lot of people are surprised when I tell them that, you know, I was born and brought up in Jamaica, but always played football.
Wow. That parallel story of you, you know, going to Washington University, getting a degree and continuing to play football, that could have been a reality if it wasn't for a taxi driver. Can you tell us about that?
Well, once again, I'm a bit of a fatalist. I don't believe in fate, and what's meant to be is meant to be. So I was playing for a local club called Sudbury Court Football Club, which is when you talk about the Premier League, then the Championship, then League One, League Two, that's the professional divisions. Then you have the non-league teams, which are the Nationwide League, which can get into the Premier League. And in England, you have 20 divisions below that. Every Saturday and Sunday, you can go and see men playing in a league, and they can't even play, but they play in a league. That's how it is here. You've got people playing football all the time. So the team I played for as a 17-year-old was not even in the top 10 divisions, I wouldn't say, in the country. After the Premier League, you know, you can go down 5 divisions below the non-league, and you know, so nobody's watching. We have maybe 2 people watching. It's just on a pitch. And I only found this out subsequently. A taxi driver decided to watch the game. He was there, and he knew a scout, so from Watford. So he actually told a scout to come and look at me. Now, I didn't know this. So I didn't know the scout even came to watch me. I mean, not these days. Back then, if you heard a scout was going to watch you, maybe you're going to be nervous. You know you have to play well because a scout's coming. But I didn't know a scout came. The first thing I knew was when Watford phoned me, and said, do you want to come to training with us? Because we've seen you, we like you, so come to start to train. So if that taxi driver hadn't stopped to watch that game, I may not have made it as a footballer. And secondly, if the taxi driver stopped to watch the game and I was a fantastic player, but I happened to have a bad game, he wouldn't have thought, well, I'm going to get a scout to look at him. Or I could have been I could have been a great player but had a bad game, and he would have thought, well, he's no good. Or I could have been a bad player and had a great game, and he told the scout to come and watch, and the scout came to watch me in the next game, and I wouldn't have played well. So, when things happen in life, we talk about sliding doors moments. We just go with it.
Well, so from there you moved into Watford, which the 1981 season. It was a very special season. That team altogether was all over the field. It was a very energetic team. There were videos and shots of you going all the way back to defending, going all the way up, all over the field. So was that, that work ethic and that hustle mentality, was that something that you brought to the team, or was that something that you picked from them, or a combination of both?
It was a combination, because my father always instilled in me discipline and teamwork. The team is the most important thing. If you're in the army, that's what it's all about. It's about teamwork. So that is where I was brought up. In so much as when I was actually speaking to a friend of mine yesterday, who, when I first came to England, played in the same team as me. And we were talking about, when we were 14 playing in the team. Of course, we're in our 50s now, and it's a coincidence. I don't speak to him very often, but I spoke to him yesterday, and we were pulling each other's legs about, who was better, because he was a very good player, but he wasn't spotted. Unfortunately, the taxi driver didn't go and watch him play. But he was equally as good as me, as were 3 or 4 others, but they weren't lucky enough to be spotted. We have so many good players who weren't spotted. But the point I was making to him was, remember when I played for Stowe Boys Club, this is before I went to the men's team at 17, and I was saying to Derek, when I played for Stowe, what position did I play? And I played centre-back. For my 3 years at my youth club, before I went to the men's team, I played centre-back. I was never a centre-back. In Jamaica, I'm an attacking player. In Jamaica, I played for the under-15s when I was 11. So as an attacking player, I was always been the player I was. But when I came to that Stowe Boys Club in Paddington in London, we were a fantastic team who were winning every week 10-0. But of course, with that, nobody wants to play at the back. Everybody wants to score goals. So I then said, I'll play at the back. Not that I'm a defender, but because my father instilled discipline and respect, and the team being the most important thing. If it's required for you to play at the back, I play at the back. So I was never a defender, but I played there for 4 years. Now, as soon as I played for the men's team, I went to play in left wing, which is where I played. And so the point I'm making is that this attitude of me playing for the team and chasing back is something I had. But equally as important, that's what Graham Taylor fostered and put in the team. Watford were not a great team. They come from the 4th division to the 1st division, to the top division in 5 years. And when we finished second to Liverpool, and Liverpool won the league, we finished second, Manchester United finished third, 90% of those players came from the 4th division. We didn't spend money and buy players for, hundreds of thousands of pounds, buy superstar players, buy Premier League players. 90% of them came from the 4th division. So how can a team coming from the 4th division with the same players finish second in the league to Liverpool and beating Manchester United into third? Because he espoused the teamwork, the discipline, the togetherness. You try hard defensively. So if I scored 3 goals, but I didn't chase back and they scored, Graham Taylor would come down hard on me, because it's about doing the right thing for the team. So it was a combination of both, my attitude in the way I played.
Well, that's great to hear. Sort of a similar question, but what do you think that, or maybe not, what do you think, John Barnes, the player, what made you stand out?
I did what was required of me for the team and the type of player I was. If people appreciated me for standing out, they appreciated me for standing out. I didn't play football to stand out. I played football for the team and to do what I liked doing, in terms of when I got the ball and I was attacking, because I was going to supply Ian Rush or John Aldridge, or if a goal was to be scored, I would score if I had to pass to somebody. So people say I stand out. I didn't see myself as standing out. I saw myself as doing what was necessary for the team. So once again, I don't really pay much importance to when people talk about how good you were, how good you think you are you better than so-and-so, are you worse than so-and-so, how do you feel about, we do what we do, and if we're appreciated, we're appreciated. And I suppose because at that time, particularly in the 80s, English football was about aggression. But the type of football I played was probably more pleasing on the eye than a typical hard-working English player. That's not to say I was more effective than him. It's just that the fact that that's the way I played, and it was appreciated because people like, You know, I'm sure in Qatar it's the same, because in Jamaica, South America, we call it pretty football. We like pretty football, where we are skillful. Now, that's been a problem with Africa and the Caribbean, and a lot of the South American teams. They play pretty football, but they can't keep the ball out of the net and they can't score goals. But in the midfield, they're brilliant, and that's what people like to see. So I tried to combine effectiveness with, I didn't do pretty football because I wanted to look good. That's the way I was brought up in Jamaica.
Well, you had some pretty football in you regardless, you know, the skill sets and the...
But look, I'll use Gary Lineker as an example. And John Aldridge. You know, when we played five-a-side,
right.
When we played five-a-side at Liverpool, we never had goalkeepers. It was like, you know, the goals are 5 yards apart, and whoever the back man saves it. So you don't have goalkeepers with gloves on, and Bruce Grobbelaar didn't play. So that's what we did. We played five-a-sides, and all we did was play five-a-side football, pass the ball around, and we score goals in the little goals. We call it scrimmage in Jamaica with little goals. When we pick the team, and you pick your team, you know, and and the last pick is always going to be the worst one. Obviously, like even if you're at school, you pick a team. You would pick in the five-a-side Bruce Grobbelaar, the goalkeeper, before you pick John Aldridge. Bruce Grobbelaar was more skillful than John Aldridge in terms of playing outfield. But John Aldridge is the record goal scorer because he could score goals. So John Aldridge wasn't a pretty footballer. Gary Lineker wasn't a pretty footballer. But they would do the right thing and be effective in scoring goals. So when you talk about being pretty, what's more important? Being effective. So if John Aldridge cannot look pretty at all, but he scored 400 goals in his career, someone who looks pretty and only scores 100 goals, people may say he's a great player, but who's more effective?
Wow.
I was fortunate that I was a pretty footballer that people appreciated, and maybe I was fairly effective.
No, of course, that's what I mean. You had it both. You had the skill sets, and and the scoring and the effectiveness and being in position. You joined Liverpool for a deal of £900,000 at the age of 18.
No, that's not true. I played for Watford from I was 17 till I was 23. I went to Liverpool at 23.
Oh, okay, 23. Sorry. So you joined Liverpool for a deal of £900,000 at the age of 23, which is still relatively young. It's two facets of the question. What was your first big purchase at that kind of a big paycheck? And how important is it for young rising superstars to have fiscal responsibility?
Well, first of all, I suppose, excuse me, I didn't have a big purchase because I was playing for England from I was 19. So I was earning money from I was 18, 19 years old. So I bought my first car and my first house when I was 19. So maybe I bought a bigger house when I came to Liverpool, but it was it's not as if that's the first time I'd earned money, because I'd been playing for England for 4 years before I came to Liverpool. People see me as, I played for Liverpool, and then my England career in 1990, 1986 against Maradona, and they remember me at Liverpool. But for 6 years, I played in the top division. And for 4 years, I'd already played for England. So I didn't go to Liverpool as a young, inexperienced player. So I was glad when I went to Liverpool that I went to Liverpool when I was that age and I had 6 years experience, because as well as having fiscal responsibility, you have responsibility to your craft, which is football. And I think if you're a 17-year-old and you go to a huge club like Liverpool, whereby they're going to praise you so much, it could go to your head. So I was brought up level-headed at Watford, a small club, being very successful, however, and having that attitude mainly from my parents and my family. So when I went to Liverpool and things really took off, I was able to handle the adulation, if you like, rather than letting it go to my head. And of course, in football, having fiscal responsibility, particularly back then, was so important, because you didn't have the advisors that you have now. Because, of course, advisors now will advise you as to what to do with your money. Back then, you were given a lot of money, and that's why so many players are bankrupt now, because they just go out and spend it, because you didn't have the agents and the financial advisors who are looking after you then, and you're earning a lot of money as a 19-year-old boy. As we all say, I wish I knew back then what I know now, because football is a little bit different than the rest of the world. You earn your money between the ages of 19 and 30, the majority of the money, and you earn less money after 30. Whereas normally in the real world, it's the other way around. You start to earn money then, and of course, because you are maturing as you grow, not in football, in the outside world, you know how to handle your money as you get older. Whereas when you're young and you're giving money and you're giving the lifestyle, then all of a sudden you get to 30, 31, 32, you finish playing and you realize you spent all your money. What are you going to do now if you can't, get another job? So it's very important, the fiscal responsibility.
What do you attribute your success at Liverpool for? Is there something specific, or is it the same thing that we,
Well, at Liverpool, it was similar to Watford in a different way, meaning that as much as you talk about Watford, and I said about Graham Taylor recognizing and understanding that the most important thing is the team, and for the team to be successful, the sum of the individuals has to align to be successful for the whole, because the individuals are not that great. Not being disrespectful, but we're not going to be as good as the Liverpool, Manchester United, Arsenal players. We've come from the 4th division, so therefore we have to be a better team. Liverpool, while they had great individuals, also had a great team. So they had a similar philosophy, not because our players aren't that great, so therefore we have to be a better team. They understood that their individual players were great, but what Bill Shankly espoused from the 1960s was the team being the most important thing, the family being the most important thing, which is the fans, which is the city, having respect for everybody. He's a bit of he was a socialist. The groundsman, the tea lady. It's a cultural thing in Liverpool where they like humble people, and Liverpool's a very humble football club. And Jurgen Klopp brought that back now. If you look at Liverpool's team now, no matter how you may see the players as superstars, they don't see themselves more important than their teammates. And that's the biggest lesson I learned at Liverpool. Kenny Dalglish, as footballers, we can't help the way people see us. People will always put their favorite footballers above his teammates. So we'll put Steven Gerrard above Lucas. We'll put Mo Salah above Georgie Wijnaldum, maybe. That's always going to happen. It always has happened. But the most important thing is for the players not to see themselves better than their teammates. And back then, even before my time, from Kenny Dalglish, who was a superstar, and Sammy Lee wasn't a superstar, Kenny would never see himself more important than Sammy on the pitch. Because what happens if you put your teammates above each other? What will then happen is that the superstar teammates are responsible for victories when they win, but they're not responsible when they lose. Because the fans tell them that. We did it with Fernando Torres and Luis Suarez. When we won, we said, Fernando Torres, the fans said, Torres, you're great. When we lost, they said, Torres, it's not your fault, it's Lucas's fault. And then if the players then start to think that, that's a recipe for disaster. Because in the old days, what used to happen was that the superstar players were held responsible when they lost, because that's the way it should be. Because if I, John Barnes, use Ian Rush, if we lost the game, the fans wouldn't say to Ian Rush, it's not your fault, it's Barry Venisfield's fault. Barry Venison the right back, because the fans don't expect Barry Venison to win them the game. They expect Ian Rush to win them the game. So why blame Barry Venison? So when we went through a period of blaming Lucas, because we're saying Lucas is not good enough, and Steven Gerrard and Torres and Suarez are, I never said, I don't think that Steven Gerrard thought that himself, but on your modern players now put themselves above the club in terms of their ambition. When you have a player saying, we need to sign better players, that's the most disrespectful thing a player can say. What he actually means by that is we have to sign better players, not to take my place, because I want to play with those better players, is to take the other's place, because I'm better than them. So, and modern fans say that. Modern fans say, we need better players. And when a superstar player comes out and says that, as you've seen it, that is when you know that that player has to leave the club. So I learned, though, lesson at Liverpool, once again, everything boils down to the team and the harmony within it.
Okay. Staying with Liverpool, there was an incident, Hillsborough disaster, which you've experienced as a player as well. Sorry to take this to sort of a downturn, but that part of your journey at Liverpool, you had the 1990 season, you had a lot of things happening, but that specific disaster is important to us and to learn from in Jisur, because we look after hospitality and how that matters in the football game. So I guess my question is that you experienced it as a player. How did you cope with it? And how can such disasters be, avoided in the future?
Well, first of all, when people ask me, and a lot of players said this when they talked about Hillsborough, and a lot of people said I had to reassess my values after Hillsborough because, I thought football was the most important thing. And when you have, nearly 100 people dying at a football match, it really makes me have to reassess my thinking. I never had to do that at all, because I knew that life is more important than football. My children, my friends, life, what goes on in Africa, what goes on around the world. You look at what happens. And I've always known from as a young boy that that's more important than football. I love football, it's my job. So I never had to reassess my values. I understood how important it was. I understood how important life is. Bill Shankly made a comment years ago that, football is more important than life and death. It's a throwaway line. He knows that's not true. But of course, it's something you say. And that was a wake-up call to people who really thought that. And some of the players said that. But for me, I never had to reassess my values. What it showed me was how fans were treated. Now, when you're talking about hospitality, of what you're invested in hospitality, the hospitality you're talking about is completely different to the hospitality that should have been afforded those victims at Hillsborough. The hospitality you're talking about is maybe being in a lounge and drinking wine and having food and, you know, nice toilets with nice soap and whatever. The hospitality that those fans should have been afforded was just a decent stadium, whereby they weren't going to be herded together, even if it's not going to be all-seater, because it doesn't have to be an all-seater stadium. It's about comfort for fans. It's about safety for fans. Now, of course, you look in Germany, in Dortmund, for example, where you got behind the goals, they've got standing, because some fans like to stand. So the hospitality doesn't necessarily have to mean, you know, exorbitant food and great facilities, which is obviously what's going to be at the Qatar World Cup. And what happens now? You go to Anfield now, it's like being in a 5-star hotel, and that's fine. But back then, the hospitality that you would get, even if you went to Anfield back then, was, yes, we don't have 5-star treatment, but you don't have fans herded into grounds whereby and fenced in and just corralled and not respected. So, of course, the hospitality now has come on leaps and bounds in terms of what fans expect. But back then, the hospitality I was interested in is just a safe place for people to go and watch and enjoy football. So, but it's interesting because you at the start, you spoke about, you said, how would I view football, and you mentioned you mentioned the hospitality. I'm a bit of a traditionalist, so I like old school stadiums. So we have to have the right balance between hospitality, because don't forget, football now, there's a new demographic of fan supporting football. You go to fans in the past, they want to stand, they want to get passionate. They don't care about sitting and eating food and drinking. Roy Keane called them the prawn sandwich brigade. You know, the prawn sandwich brigade, where you're in a nice box and stuff, which is fantastic. And that is why football has improved, because we're getting a new group of fans who can now come and experience. And of course, that's what they want. So, of course, it's much better now than it was back then. But with Hillsborough, what he also showed me was how much people love football. Because when I went to funerals, I went to about 5 or 6 funerals. And even the people, and you have to remember, this should have been the happiest day of people's lives. They were going to the semi-final of a match. These are 10-year-old boys, 14-year-old boys, mothers, fathers, and some of them didn't come home. If that was my child, I wouldn't want anything to do with football again. But a lot of those people who lost their loved ones at the funerals were saying, I cannot believe that I'm sitting here with John Barnes. And if whoever died was looking down at me now, they'd feel so happy that I'm here with you. That shows how much football means to people. That shows how much joy football gets from people, which I love football. But football fans are more passionate than me, because I would not be like that. You know, and I'm talking about, this is 3 weeks after the event. Years later, you can look back and you can say, yes, it's fantastic because you got to meet. But this is 3 weeks after you've lost a loved one, and you still feel that love and that passion for your club, Liverpool, and that joy because you're sitting there with Kenny Dalglish or Ian Rush.
Wow, that's something definitely to remember and keep in mind. You were very gifted as a star, and this question will go out for our delegates in the sports management program, but you were very gifted physically and mentally, and you had the skills of a footballer. But what would you say that some of the soft skills that helped you to be a better player?
Humility, a reverence for the game. John Barnes is more important than football. John Barnes is more important than his team. Empathy, understanding that maybe your teammates aren't as, if you want to say he's gifted, but he's not gifted, because we're gifted in different ways. You know, the right back who's a good defender, who'll stand on the line and get the ball in the face, and he's lying there because he saved us, whereas I may be 3 players, I'm not more important than him. So once again, it's really just understanding, and that is why I mention Liverpool all the time, because Liverpool is a humble city, it's a humble football club. Premier League football isn't humble. Premier League football is about superstars and money, whereas Liverpool and Jurgen Klopp brought that back, and that is what Bill Shankly had, Bob Paisley, Kenny Dalglish. The Premier League era started in 1992-93. That is when humility went out of football. That is when footballers started to become pop stars and superstars who thought themselves not a part of a community. When I went to Liverpool, I can go back even further when Ian St. John and Ian Callaghan from the 60s, they actually used to get the bus. I'm not talking about the Liverpool bus. I'm talking about the number 22 that you've got to pay to go to the stadium with the fans. They just used to walk in with the fans. Now, of course, when I went in the 80s, things have changed. Well, of course, we got cars, we're not getting the bus. But Bill Shankly spoke about still having that togetherness and that harmony with the fans and the group. So empathy and humility for me are some of the softer skills that you need in life, in business. Because of course, when you're talking about business, when you're talking about whatever you're doing, you're working in a community. You're working with people. And even though you may earn more money than them, you may be their boss, you may be more important than them, unless you are able to do everything by yourself, you have to have that empathy with other people. Even if the world or society sees them as inferior to you, you have to have that relationship with them. So I think from my point of view, I've always had that. And that's the real Liverpool trait, because you have certain players who are Liverpool players who, they're great players who play for Liverpool, but they're not Liverpool players. They've been fantastic. They've scored goals. Whereas you have Liverpool players who have to have that respect, that responsibility, that empathy with the city, with the town, with the club, with the people, with the fans, not the superstar fans, with the tea lady, with the normal man in the street, the homeless person in Liverpool. And that is what I think makes Liverpool the club and the city it is. And I think that's what makes people the way they are.
Wow, well, that's a great insight. And definitely it's one of the most necessary skills in life, just in general. You've ruptured your Achilles tendon, which is one of the toughest injuries that an athlete could sustain. 4 questions about that period of your life. How was it being out for a year? Take us through the rehab process, and what kept you motivated, and how did you adjust?
Well, first of all, when I ruptured my Achilles tendon, I met the surgeon years later, and he said he didn't think I'd play again. They never told me that at the time, but they didn't think I'd play again. So I did it playing for England just before Euro 92, and I motivated myself because I love football and I wanted to play football. I then became a different player. I was not able to do the things I did before. John Barnes, pre-ruptured Achilles tendon, was, as you say, an exciting, skillful player. When I ruptured my Achilles tendon and I couldn't run, I then had to go into midfield to be a supplier, just a normal midfield player like a Lucas, just to pass the ball to McManaman and Fowler for them to do what I did. Now, what I could have done was I could have become depressed because I'm not the player I was, but I was never into I was never in football for the glory. I was never in football to be the main player. I was always in football to try and help my team. And if I could help my team, now that I'm older, I'm 28 years old, we've got a young team, and I'm not going to be the player I am, the fans are going to say, well, Barnsley's finished. What's Barnsley doing? He's not the same player. But I could help my team by helping those young players to become better. I was happy to do that. Now, what I don't know, I would like to think, had I not ruptured my Achilles tendon, I could have still been the same player, but I don't know that. All I know is what I did when I ruptured my Achilles tendon. So I then had to adjust, and I had to do what I did. And people may not have appreciated it, and that's because obviously physically I was not able to run and do what I did. But in terms of in my own head, as long as I was contributing and I was still getting enjoyment, because my enjoyment comes from playing football. I suppose you get slightly more enjoyment if you can beat 3 players and put it in the top corner. But I didn't get any less enjoyment because I had to control it and have one touch and pass it to Robbie Fowler to score. Because it was not about me being the star. If I was the star, fine. If I'm not the star, not a problem, as long as I'm contributing. So I didn't really have to get my head around the fact that, I'm not the same player anymore and I ruptured my Achilles tendon. Because, of course, what I don't know is that had I not done that, I don't know what I would have done. I'd like to think I still would have gone on and been the best player and scored lots of goals, but I don't know. All I know is what actually happened. That's why you can never regret what you don't know. So to then say you regretted something in the past because you assumed that in the future things would have been better, we really don't know. We don't know. So when people talk about the glass half full and half empty, people say, I am either the glass half full, the glass half empty, if they're negative, and if they're a positive person, they say the glass is half full for me. I don't say that. I say the glass is always full. So if my glass is half empty or half full, for example, and people go, oh, your glass is half full, that's a good way to look at it. I say it's not half full, it is full to the brim, because at this moment in time, that is where it should be. I know that it can get fuller, but at this moment in time, it is, if it's a quarter full, for me, it's full 100%, because we can't change that. So we have to deal with the fact that this is where it is. So why get depressed when getting depressed or thinking that I wish it was more and it's not more? You have to accept what comes your way. And I suppose I'm a fatalist in that way. So it never troubled me psychologically at all.
Would you say the humility that you had throughout your career really came in handy to deal with such a process?
Absolutely, not just the humility, but it's understanding how fortunate I am, because I've seen people as I said, I always knew about life. I always knew about life. And I've seen people, forget football, you look at what goes on in life, and then who am I to feel depressed because I've ruptured my Achilles tendon, yes, my career is on hold, or, you know, I can't do what I did. But you look around life and you see how people are just so many more people. I'm more blessed than 99% of people. So of course we want perfection. So I want everything to go my way. And that's when I rationally think about it. And I think my life could be infinitely worse than it is now. As much as thinking, most people look at other people's lives and say, oh, you know, his life's better than mine and I want what he has. I look at people who are worse off than me, and there are many more people worse off than me, even when I was injured. And I say, I'm better off than them. So who am I to even complain about that?
My last major question in a way was, what lessons have you learned as a professional player in your 30s and towards the end of your career? Was there any major lessons that you picked on from that aspect of your journey?
I haven't learned any lessons that I didn't learn by the time I came an adult at 17, 18 years old. Because as I said, I understood about respect, humility, treating people correctly, the essence of the team, the essence of the community, the essence of the family. And I'm now 57, and I remember feeling the same way when I was 21, 22, 20, 19. Obviously, as a kid, you're selfish and you want to, you know, go and do stuff. But and as a father, I find myself saying things to my kids that my parents said to me. But there's nothing new. And I was very fortunate to be brought up in the way I was with my parents, and then my first manager, Graham Taylor. If I went to a different club with a different manager and had a different experience, then I went to Watford with Graham Taylor when I was 30, I would then say, well, between the ages of 30 and 35, when I met Graham Taylor, this is what I learned. And I wish I'd known that before. But I was fortunate to know what I consider to be the right way to be for a human, not just a footballer, but for a person, ever since I was young, and in a footballing experience, ever since I was first with Graham Taylor. So my growth has I won't say it's been stagnant, but I think now at 57 and looking back at things that people are now talking about now, and I think, well, I thought this when I was 19, 20, 21.
That's amazing.
And I thank the environment I was brought up in to give me that. I'm not taking credit for it and taking glory for it. I'm giving it to my parents, first and foremostly. That's from a human point of view. And from a professional point of view, I learned a lot of football lessons at Liverpool. But all the life lessons I learned about football came from Watford. And Liverpool kind of endorsed it.
May 1989, was that a football lesson? You had a chance of winning the league in the last game of the season.
It's interesting. It is. But once again, you know the football lesson I learned from that? I'll tell you the lesson I learned from that. People say John Barnes should have taken the ball in the corner. I don't know if you watched the game. There was 90 minutes gone, and I've got the ball, and I'm heading to the corner flag, and I tried to cut in to cross and score. They got the ball, threw it out, and then they scored. And people say you should have taken the ball in the corner. And once again, I've thought about this for years, not just about that, but about life in general. When football fans say, we've lost the league by 1 point, and they will pinpoint the time when that's when we lost, but we should have won. And if we won that game, we would have won the league. People always say that. That's when, like when Steven Gerrard slipped against Crystal Palace, I don't know if you remember, or John Barnes didn't take the ball in the corner. And I say to fans, we all remember, but what about when we've won, but we should have lost? Have you ever thought about that? So we could have lost 5 points. That's why I'm a fatalist and say, whatever happens is meant to happen. It's meant to happen. Now, if I'd taken the ball in the corner, as people say I should have done, do we know 100% that I took the ball in the corner, wasted 2 minutes, they got the ball, they could have gone on and scored? Do we know that? We don't know that, but people assume that if you took the ball in the corner, they wouldn't have scored. We don't know what would have happened. Very much like when I said I ruptured my Achilles tendon, and what would have happened had I not ruptured my Achilles tendon, we don't know. Yes, John Barnes could have gone on to be the best player in the world, or I could have just not been, I could have been worse than I was before I ruptured my, we don't know. So when people say, you know, if you took the ball in the corner, this wouldn't have happened. That's not the case at all. We really don't know what would have happened, to accept it. But I'll tell you the biggest lesson I learned from that, and this is a Watford thing, it's a Liverpool thing. I'll tell you the year before that we won the league. And when we won the league, we came in and Ronnie Moran, the coach, had the winners' medals just in the dressing room in a plastic bag. There's no presentation, in a plastic bag. And he puts the medals on the table and he says, pre-season training July the 7th. That's all he said. We didn't make a song and dance and get carried away because we've won. Why? Because we've won. It's over. It's in the past. Yes, it's only 5 minutes ago, but it's in the past. What do we have to do? We have to win it again next year. And how do we keep that hunger to win it next year? Is it when we've done it, you forget about it. Because if we're still celebrating because we won the league, and we're celebrating for the next 2, 3, 4 months, this next season will start, we're losing matches, but we've still won the league. We're still league champions. So you have to forget about it. That's the easy attitude to have when you're winning. What about when you've lost? So 1989, we lost against Arsenal. Came in the dressing room, and don't forget, when we lost against Arsenal, 89 minutes of that match, we are league champions. 89 minutes. In our head, we are league champions. 90 minutes, they score, we've lost the league, can we get it back? No, the referee blows the whistle. How devastated are we going to be? Because don't forget, for 89 minutes, we were happy. Now, that 1 minute, we're now not happy. So what frame of mind are we going to be in? We've come in, and for a few minutes, it's like, oh, no, whatever. Ronnie Moran, remember the year before? Winners' medals in a bag. This year, losers' medals in a bag. Puts them on the table, and he says, preseason training July the 7th. Why he does that? It's because just like when we've won, we forget about it. When we've lost, if we wallow in self-pity and despair because we've lost, how are we going to raise ourselves up to go and play the next year? And we rose ourselves and we went and won the league the next year. So the way we treated when we won and when we lost was exactly the same. Obviously, if you lost, you may argue a bit more. But what you do is you give 100% commitment, determination, effort. And if you win, you win. If you lose, you lose. And as long as you leave everything out on the pitch and you play with integrity and you try your best, this is my philosophy on life. You can only give 100%. You can't give any more. You can only maximize your potential. When you hear about people overachieving or a team overachieved, Leicester did not overachieve when they won the league. It is impossible to overachieve. Impossible. What you can do is maximize your potential. You cannot overachieve. You can only maximize your potential. What you can do is underachieve. So when Leicester won the league, they didn't overachieve. They maximized their potential. And Liverpool, Manchester City, Manchester United underachieved. That's why Leicester won. So, that's how I explained it. If I'm going to race Usain Bolt, not a 57, but say I'm 26, I'm going to run against Usain Bolt. Usain Bolt's best time is 9.6. My best time is 10.8. I race Usain Bolt. Usain Bolt beats me. He does 10.1. I do 10.5. I've won. I've won because I've done my best. I've maximized my potential, whereas he hasn't. He's run half a second slower than he does. So you don't compete against other people. You compete against yourself. We can't all be the best, but you can be the best you can be. And I've always said to my children when they're studying for exams, you do as well as you can. And as long as you know you've done as well as you can, and you've got as close to your potential as you can, then nobody can complain. Nobody can argue with you. And that's what I've always done, or I've tried to do.
Wow. With that, we will conclude the journey aspect of the session. This is sort of, in a nutshell, the question that we wanted to highlight for your footballing career. And we're going to move into life after football, which is something that's also very important, an aspect that, a lot of players need to keep in mind. So we'll start off. How did you process life after football? Did it feel like a void? You've been playing since you were 13 and then you retired. How was it like, like there's no more?
Well, it's like when you asked me and I explained my philosophy on the situation after Hillsborough, for example, when I didn't have to reassess my values about life because I knew life and death more important than football. There was no life after football. My life continued throughout football. When I played football, my life continued. Being a footballer was never who I was. Being a footballer was what I was. And I've never, ever got the two mixed up. What I am is John Barnes, the footballer, who people idolize and I score goals and I earn money, and that's what I am. Who I am is John Barnes, the husband, father, friend, normal person who has to go shopping, pick the kids up from school, and have a normal life. And when I played football, that's what I did. That's what I did. So my life didn't change. The part of my life that changed was I'm not going to training anymore. I'm not playing football. But I still had to take my kids to school. I still had to eat. I still had to have friends. I continued with my life. Problem that footballers have, or celebrities or sports people, is that they buy into this whole thing. This is who I am. And I'll tell you why I thought this once again from when I was 17 years old, was because I remember when I played for Watford as an 18-year-old, and the old Watford players used to come back to watch the game or to get tickets or whatever. And I saw the way that either the fans or the ticket office people or people treated them, and it was like, these people are retired now. They've had their day. Why do they keep coming back wanting tickets and wanting to be around? And I said to myself, I'm 18-year-old superstar, and you got a 35-year-old, 40-year-old ex-Watford player coming back and no one wants to know him and he's being ignored. I say, you know what? When I finish, that could be me. That could be me. And then what do I do if that's me? Do I then get depressed and say, I played for this club for 20 years and I can't get a ticket and you should love me now? You don't Salah now. Well, John, I still feel hurt because the club doesn't respect them because they don't give them tickets back and let them come back or whatever. And I always felt that when you've had your time, you've had your time. And I've always had a life outside. We have all had a life outside of football. I'm no different to anybody else. But players who believe that that is their life, then all of a sudden when that's not their life anymore, they all of a sudden become shocked because it was like, well, you know, when I played, you told me you loved me and how great I was, and now I'm not playing anymore. You don't want to know me. I knew that when I was 18 that could happen. Fortunately, I'm an ambassador for Liverpool and the fans still like me, so I'm afforded the luxury and the privilege of still being in the public eye. But it wouldn't bother me if I wasn't, because that's not. So to answer your question in terms of my life after football, my life after football is no different, apart from the fact that I'm not training anymore means that I've put on a bit of weight. But in terms of what I do, nothing has changed.
You became a manager of Celtic and later the Jamaican national team. Tell us about the skill sets you brought in as a player to a manager.
Well, once again, the skill sets I brought in was what I learned from my father in terms of determination, togetherness, team spirit, the team being the most important thing, not the superstars. And that's what I actually continued into Liverpool. But when I took over as a manager, football had changed, meaning that since the Premier League, the individual superstar footballer became more important than the team, and equally as damaging, more important than the manager. Because when you look at managers like even Jose Mourinho, whether you like him or not, and he's going to lose his job because the players don't like him, that could never happen in the past. I was brought up in the way that the manager is the most important person. Regardless of whether John Barnes is playing for England, Graham Taylor is more important. The manager, regardless of who the manager is and who you are, the manager is the most important person. Whereas football has changed whereby the individual player became more important. So therefore, what I found hard, not when I managed Jamaica, because when I managed Jamaica national team, we never lost one game. We had 11 matches. We played Nigeria, Costa Rica, El Salvador, teams better than us, but we never lost one game because I did what we did at Watford, talked about the physical attributes that players have, and Jamaicans, West Africans, we're strong, we're physical, we can compete if we're well organized, and that's what we were. So we're well organized, and that was my philosophy. When I went to Celtic, being a huge club with big egos and big stars who are more important than me, I couldn't make some of them feel that the team is more important than them, or they should be as important as their lesser teammates. Because Premier League football, I went to Celtic in '99, and after '94, the individual aspect of a superstar player being more important than his teammates really came to the fore. And I didn't manage that way. There are certain managers who would allow certain superstar players to get away with certain things and do certain things because he knows that he's going to need him. But I was never brought up that way, and I would not do that. So I think a lot of the superstar players then felt that, well, you know, why are you just talking about the team and I'm the one and my agent's telling me that I can do this, I should do that. So that was an eye-opener. And that's why you have to find the right club that suits you, which is why Jurgen Klopp is at the right club. Because Liverpool's philosophy from Bill Shankly was always that. And Jurgen doesn't like superstar players. People are talking about Jurgen going out and signing lots of players. Yes, he has 2 or 3 or 4, but the rest of the players have to be good, honest, hardworking players. So he doesn't like that mentality. And I didn't like that mentality because that's not the way I was brought up. So the skill sets I brought was what I learned as a young man growing up with my parents, because football is like life. It's a team sport. It's about the team. And it's about having characters there who buy into your philosophy. Now, I wasn't there long enough to turn things around to get players who bought into my philosophy. Because what happens is the manager's the one who gets sacked before the players. So any player that I felt would not fit into my philosophy, in the old days, I would have been able to last longer than him and get him out and get my team in and get the players in who I understood would understand and want to do what I said. But in modern football, you don't get that time. So it didn't last long.
So then there was another transition from a footballer to a manager, and then to sort of like a TV personality, a football analyst, or television pundit. So was there a difference of shifting of career there, or was it something that you've done all along outside of the field? How was that transition like?
Well, it was fairly seamless because I believe I can talk, and I can talk about what I know about, and I know about football. So it was never an issue with me. I suppose very much like my managerial career a little bit in terms of me not, when you say maximizing your potential from a media perspective or from a pundit perspective, you have to be true to yourself. As a manager, what I could do is I could not be true to myself and treat the players differently, but that's not me being true to myself, so I couldn't do that, which is why I wasn't successful. And as a pundit, it's exactly the same. Because what I could do as a pundit to be successful is to be gratuitous and to be controversial, just for the sake of it. And I know then you'll get big contracts, people want to listen to you because that's what they want to hear. But that's not who I am. So therefore, what I would never do as a pundit, which is why I probably didn't do as well as other pundits, I would never be overly critical. And why I wouldn't be is because I know how easy it is to miss an open goal, particularly as a player. So when you see players who are now pundits, who then say, that's terrible and you should never do that, and that's what, and the fans love that, and the media love that, and the television companies love that. But I'm looking at him and said, well, when you played, you did the same thing. So you should have some empathy with them. Now, as a pundit, you have to be informative and you have to be constructive. So there are ways of saying certain things to criticize, but also constructively. Whereas to be, I don't know if you know a man called Piers Morgan. I don't know if you know Piers Morgan. He does a GMB here. He gets by on just being controversial. And unfortunately, he's the most successful man here because that's what he is. Now, I could do that, but it's not my nature. And I don't believe that I would necessarily want to be famous just by doing that. So as a pundit, I would always be non-controversial. I would always have empathy with the players who miss open goals, with fans. And that's maximizing my potential. Maximizing potential is really being true to what you believe in. So as a pundit, I find that the easiest of the three. Easiest of the three. Because, listen, it's always, as a footballer, you got to play in the present. You got to play in the present in terms of playing when it's actually happening. As a manager, you have to play in the future, meaning you have to say to your team what's going to happen. And this is what you have to do in the future. If the game's in half an hour, as a manager, I have to tell those players what they should go out there and do before it even starts. And that is so difficult because there's so many, things that may happen that you really don't know about. And that's why Liverpool was a great club, because Ronnie Moran, he was an incredible man. He's a coach. Ronnie Moran would say to you, listen, you have to work it out yourself. That's his mantra, work it out yourself. Managers now say, this is what you're going to do, you do that. Why Ronnie Moran said that was because he said, I can tell you what I think is going to happen, and this is what you're going to do. And it sounds great. But when you get out there, suppose what I tell you is going to happen doesn't happen. What are you going to do? Are you going to look at me and say, you said this was going to happen? No. You have to react and you've got to work it out yourself. So managers who pretend. That is why when you ask a football manager, what would you do different? What should you have done? And of course, they can't tell you the truth. And the truth is, I know the options I would have had, but I don't know whether that would have worked. What they have to say is that, no, what I would do next time is this. Because and that's what I say to football fans as well. When football fans say, oh, he should have brought him on earlier. He should have played him on the left wing. He should have played him because the team has lost. I say to football fans, if the manager did everything you said, do you know 100% that they wouldn't have lost 5-0 instead of 2-0? Do you know that? We don't know. We don't know. But of course, we assume that, if you did that, this is what would happen. So that is why, as a manager, you have to actually say what's going to happen before the event. As a player, you have to do it in the present. And as a pundit, we live in the past. What we say is, after seeing it, we then say, oh, that's what he should have done. And that's obvious. Obviously, when you dive in for a tackle and you miss the ball and they score, you then go, he shouldn't have dived in. But before he dives in, you don't say he should dive in because you don't know what's going to happen. So as a pundit, it is really the easiest of the three.
Okay. How do you, we're going to talk a little bit about education and education in the sports industry. What are issues in the sports industry in general that could be addressed via education? How can we, what's the importance of education in the sports industry? And that question means from a technical perspective, whether it's sports management or if it's...
Can you just, excuse me a second. Can you just give me 1 second?
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. Stop the thing, give me 1 second.
For sure.
Sorry, yeah, I'm back. Yeah. What did you say about the what?
So education.
Well, education is the most important thing in my life, in my children's lives. I've got a son who's a plastic surgeon. I've got a daughter who's a doctor. I've got another son who's works for Standard Chartered. He got a first in maths. And I've always felt education is the most important thing in life. What type of an education you get, it differs. Different people do different things. When you talk about business, you talk about academia, you talk about science. My wife's a scientist, but she's doing a law degree. Education of life is the most important thing. So obviously at the Institute, you're really talking about sports management. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. So that type of an education, you really have to understand the industry you're in. You look at agents. Football isn't, sports management isn't like a science whereby you have to do this. This is what has to work. We need air to breathe. Mathematics, 2 + 2 = 4. English, everything is very uniform. In sports management, there are different ways of doing different things. And that is why you really have to be careful. Particularly in sports management, when you are doing a degree in sports management and you go through that education, then you get into the big bad world and you realize that, well, it doesn't work the way that we've actually been taught because it isn't controlled, particularly the sports agency, and it isn't regulated in many respects. So I think that you have to look at the environment as a whole to say, let it be harmonious in terms of when you actually do a sports science degree or you're doing whatever you do at the Institute, then you get into the world and it correlates because this is the way we have been taught and this is what works. So I don't think we've got that right yet in terms of the harmony between the reality of sports management and the ideology behind what you actually learn, if that makes sense.
Yes. Okay. I think that answers the question. Did we have a network? Okay, so did having a network of contacts help you develop further in your professional career? How important is it?
Well, there, once again, having a network can help one develop their career. But as I mentioned, the pitfalls of the sporting industry and the footballing industry means that the networks that would have benefited me, I really didn't want to get involved in them. And there are certain things you have to do, and we call it playing the game to get to a certain position and to get on in life, if you want to talk about it being financially or in the media, which I would not be prepared to do to then, because very much like, I suppose, management, when I wouldn't compromise my beliefs or my philosophy in terms of treating a player differently because I may not like that player, I may not believe in what he's doing, but I needed him. I won't compromise myself. So, but I understand exactly what you say. Having a network is very important, but I think the most important thing is to align yourself with people who are similar to you. Yes, having a network is important because I think ultimately having a network just for the sake of having a network of somebody who's influential, who you may not believe in or believe in his philosophy, but you want to do that because you think he can help you. In the short term, it could work, but in the long term, no. So, yeah, aligning yourself with similar-minded people. And as much as when you're young, it's difficult to do because you're trying to get on, and you may look at something that you may think would be more lucrative or more influential in your career, but you may have a gut feeling that I don't really like the way it's going, but it will help me. That's when you have to make that decision as to which path you want to take.
Okay. You've experienced the game as a player and as a pundit, a media personality. What is the role of media in affecting the game, the football game? Does it affect players? And if so, how?
The role of the media, in my opinion, is no different than the role of the media in life. The role of the media is to tell the truth because it influences people. And you can see what's going on in politics. And you look on, I don't know if you saw the American debate last night or what's going on here, and you're listening to COVID-19, and you're listening to fake news, and you're listening to all kinds of stuff. The media have a role because they have to inform. And the footballing media is exactly the same. On a sports media is exactly the same. So the role of the media, but once again, the media may differ. The media may say it's about selling newspapers or it's about getting ratings. And I mentioned Piers Morgan, it's all about ratings with him. So how can we then criticize the media if they're the most popular, regardless of why they're the most popular? So we've got the ethical media. We've got media who are successful because they're popular. So when you say the role of the media, people look at it differently. But my take on the role of the media is to be as honest as possible.
Okay.
Because you influence people, you influence people's lives. And as much as, it's also about selling newspapers, I understand, or being popular, having the balance is important.
Okay, and in specific for the football player itself, how do you think that influences the player? You think, when you were a player, for instance, did you watch?
I've got a great example of this. When I played for Watford, the media loved me. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Sorry. Yeah.
When I played for Watford, the media loved me because playing for Watford, a small team, we're beating Manchester United, we're beating Tottenham, we're beating Arsenal. In England, we like the underdog because they want to criticize the big teams. When I played for England, the media gave me a hard time because I wasn't born in England, so I wasn't committed to England, they said, and because, if I wasn't playing well, it was because of my non-commitment, because I like West Indies cricket, blah, blah, blah. I'm 19 years old. Graham Taylor called me to his office because I was having a hard time in the media. And he said, when they tell you how great you are when you play for Watford? I said, yeah. He said, do you believe them? He said, if you believe them when they tell you that, when they tell you that you're rubbish playing for England, you've got to believe that as well. So how do you respond to the media? The media should never affect the footballer, but unfortunately it does. And I suppose in this day and age, it has to, because, and as you know, football now is different, whereby sponsorship and players' individual sponsors is now coming to the fore, whereby a player can get more money, more sponsorship, even if his club aren't successful, if he's successful. So therefore, the media can influence an individual player's life. But what it can't do, it can't influence the game of football or his performance on the pitch. Because it's 11 against 11, and the media saying he's great. If he's not great, he's not gonna play great because the media says he is. And if the media says he's not great, it's not that he's not going to not be great because the media says he is. So therefore, the media doesn't affect the game of football, but what it does affect off-field situations and players' attitude off the field, which then could go onto the field. Because if the media then says that a player and an agent say to the player, well, you have to go and fly here because you've got a big sponsorship deal, and the media need you to do that, but you've got a game the next day, that could affect you on field in terms of your performances. So getting the balance right is important. But to answer your question, the media does not in one iota affect what happens on the field. Forget football, let's look at sport. So the media is going to tell me and the world that I'm going to beat Mike Tyson in the boxing ring. All the fans are going to believe it. That's not going to help me when I get in the ring with Mike Tyson because the media says I'm going to do it, or I'm going to beat Usain Bolt. So it doesn't affect sport whatsoever. It affects the industry of sport, because the media saying I'm going to beat Mike Tyson means the sponsors are going to come and give me loads of money because the media are building me up. And of course, after getting knocked out in the first 10 seconds, I'll make a lot of money because before the fight, the media says how great I was. So, but in terms of the sport itself, it doesn't affect results. It can affect results if the players start to believe it. If the players start to believe they're better than they are, or they start to believe they're worse than they are, it can affect them. Now that's where you need good management, good agents, strong-willed people around you to tell you the truth about the reality of what's real. So no matter what the media say about, Liverpool may falter because they may choke, that's not going to make Liverpool choke. And Jurgen Klopp isn't going to make those players choke. But if the players start to believe it, it could affect them. So if you believe the media, it can affect you, positively or negatively.
World Cup 2022. Excited? Do you think it would be special?
Absolutely, looking forward to it immensely. Just to go back onto the media, there's a situation. When I first got involved with the World Cup bid, you listen to the media's portrayal of Qatar and what it was going to be like. And if you believe that, the Qatar people never have gone to Qatar, and the World Cup will never have gone to Qatar because people are talking about what was happening in Qatar and they should never go there, which obviously wasn't true. And that's the role the media can actually play if people are forthright and single-minded enough to know the truth, seek the truth, tell the truth, and believe in what's right. So 2022 is going to be a fantastic World Cup. Fantastic World Cup. If you look at the reality of 2022, and let's fact check, because I saw Donald Trump the other night, and if you fact check Donald Trump, you get 20,000 lies. It's going to be the coolest World Cup. When I say coolest, I'm talking about temperature, probably in history. Any World Cup, Mexico, England, 1966, it was 90 to 100 degrees. In December, it's not going to be that way. The ease of access to get around in terms of fans having a real World Cup experience in Russia. Listen, the thing is, World Cups are going to be great no matter where they are. In Mars, because the football is so powerful, the fans come together. But in Russia, you can't have a World Cup experience because if Serbia are playing Croatia or Croatia are playing Spain in Moscow or out in Vladivostok, there's no one within 1,000 miles of them. So yes, the two fans are there together, but you don't feel a World Cup experience of everybody being there together under one roof, whereas in Qatar it will. Ease of access of people getting to other stadiums within an hour, going to watch other games. And the World Cup for me is about people coming together, different fans from different nations all being together. And that really hasn't happened in any World Cup because it's been so big. So, you know, and interestingly, the players are going to be at the peak. No player has been at the peak in any World Cup because the World Cup is at the end of the season. At the end of the season, players are tired. The euphoria and the excitement of winning a World Cup means that they go and they play on adrenaline, and they do play well. Don't get me wrong, every World Cup has been fantastic. But you're at your peak in November and December. You started playing in July, started training in July, August, September, October, you're getting fit because it's only been 2 months into the season. Come November, December, that's when you're at your peak. Then January, February, March, you've trained for a long time, you've played for a long time, you start to tail off. So players in November and December are at their peak fitness. That's when they're strongest. It's going to be a cool atmosphere. Stadiums are going to be great. It's a small place. What's not to love?
Amazing. We're all looking forward to it. This is it from my end. We come to the end. I have Mikhail on the call, my colleague here, Tesur. Mikhail, are you on?
Hi, Abdallah. Hello, John. Thank you so much for your time.
That's okay. Abdullah, how are you doing?
I'm well. Mikhail, if you have anything to add?
I think this has been great, greatly informative and inspiring. I wonder if, Abdallah, you have any other question in relation to other topics that might have come to mind as you were listening to John's answers.
No, I think we've covered it all from my end.
Okay.
John, thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated. Great insights.
Thank you very much.
Look forward to
I'll see you soon. All the best.
All right. Take care. All right. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.